Foreword. In physics, power is the rate of work per unit time. In geopolitics, it is the ability of one nation to influence the behavior of other nations. It's not surprising that the same word, with its root in the Latin posse, to be able, refers to both concepts. A nation's command of physical power, notably through its control over primary energy resources such as oil, not only shapes its economic development but also its national security and military strength. As such, the international relations of nations are profoundly influenced by the distributions of energy resources and the technologies for their utilization. Every great transition in energy technology entails a shift in geopolitics as well. Our generation's energy transition to zero-carbon energy, or decarbonization, will reshape geopolitics of the 21st century. This superb volume offers a deeply informed tour de horizon of the geopolitics of global energy decarbonization, and the ways that geopolitics may stymie or support the transition to climate safety. Energy transitions have defined several key epochs of human history. Early man's harnessing of fire changed the genetic and cultural trajectory of humanity itself. The harnessing of wind power for sailing ships enabled sea-based trade and migrations over vast distances. The harnessing of horsepower gave rise to empires. And without doubt, it was James Watt's coal-fired steam engine, building on precursors of Savory and Newcomen, that gave rise to industrialization, and with it, to Britain's remarkable global hegemony in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Watt's invention, commercialized around 1776, ushered in the fossil fuel age, a period of more than 2 centuries in which global economic growth has been powered by solar energy of tens of millions of years ago stored in fossilized remains of plant and animal life. By gaining the ability to harness the fossil fuels, coal, oil and natural gas, humanity tapped into a seemingly limitless reserve of power. Watt's coal-fired steam engine was followed by Daimler and Benz's internal combustion engine for automobiles, and Parsons and Curtis's gas turbines for transport and mechanical power. The global distribution of fossil fuel is highly unequal, with some countries blessed with massive reserves and others bereft of fossil fuels that are exploitable on an economical basis. Ownership of plentiful fossil fuels, not surprisingly, has tended to give a huge boost to economic development, military might and geopolitical influence. Britain's highly accessible coal reserves were essential to turn Watt's new steam engine from a mere curiosity to the source of Britain's imperial might. Other countries with accessible coal reserves generally found an earlier path to industrialization in the 19th and 20th centuries. By the early 20th century, oil joined coal as a new key currency of geopolitics, especially after Winston Churchill ordered Britain's navy to convert from coal-burning steam engines to oil-burning steam engines, to be followed later by the navy's conversion from steam power to diesel engines. The control of oil became key to military and geopolitical power. Like coal, oil was very unequally distributed around the world. Oil-rich regions like the US and Russia gained vast geopolitical and economic advantages, or alternatively fell victim to military conquests by Britain, the US, Russia and other major powers that acted militarily to secure their oil supplies. But for the climate crisis, the fossil fuel era would surely be continuing today and into the future with the exploitation of new fossil fuel reserves through fracking, deep-sea drilling and other advances in exploration, development and utilization. Despite claims to the contrary, the world has enough coal, oil and natural gas to last for centuries. The fossil fuel era is ending not by running out of fossil fuels but for a wholly different reason, indeed a quirk of quantum physics. As great 19th century scientists including Fourier, Tyndall and Arrhenius came to realize that fossil fuels have a pesky side effect. When they are combusted, they release carbon dioxide, CO2, into the atmosphere, and CO2 has the quantum physical property of absorbing electromagnetic radiation at infrared wavelengths. The implication? Atmospheric CO2 warms Earth by trapping infrared radiation that would otherwise radiate from Earth to outer space. CO2 is, in modern parlance, a greenhouse gas. To an extent, this is life-saving good news. Without atmospheric CO2 and other greenhouse gases, Earth would be as cold and lifeless as the Moon. Yet with too much atmospheric CO2, the Earth's temperature will rise to dangerous levels. Such is our current predicament and the backstory of this important volume. Humanity has already raised the atmospheric concentration of CO2 from 280 parts per million, ppm, to around 415 ppm in May 2019, mostly through fossil fuel use but also through deforestation and other economic activities. The result is that the planet is now around 1.2 degrees Celsius warmer than when Watt unveiled his world-changing steam engine. 1.2 degrees Celsius might not seem like much, but it is enough to make Earth warmer than at any time since the start of civilization itself some 10,000 years ago. It is enough to be disrupting societies, economies and ecosystems around the world. We are already in an era of intense storms, rising sea levels, droughts, floods, emerging infectious diseases, massive forest fires and other climate-related disasters. We are already suffering worldwide losses amounting to hundreds of billions of dollars per year, and mass displacements of populations, including losses of life. And the prospects of further warming are even more dangerous. The Earth is already at, or soon will be at, temperatures high enough to result in a multi-meter rise of ocean levels, with the consequence of disrupting lives for hundreds of millions or billions of people around the world. Moreover, the Earth's climate system is characterized by multiple positive feedbacks that amplify the human-induced warming, such as the loss of sea ice, which reduces the Earth's albedo and accelerates warming, the melting of the permafrost, which releases methane and carbon dioxide, and the drying of rainforests, turning them from carbon sinks to carbon sources. For all of these reasons, every UN member state adopted the Paris Climate Agreement in December 2015 to hold warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, and to aim to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or less. Each country is to put forward a nationally determined contribution of energy transformation and other economic changes, e.g. in land use and diets, so that the sum of the national efforts will be sufficient to achieve the global goal. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, has, in turn, underscored the importance of adhering to the lower bound of 1.5 degrees Celsius rather than 2 degrees Celsius in order to improve the prospects of climate safety. Moreover, to have a likely, greater than 66%, outcome of 1.5 degrees Celsius or less, the world as a whole must achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. In shorthand, the world must decarbonize by 2050 and shift from net deforestation to net reforestation and afforestation. So far, the world is grievously off track, hurtling towards warming by 2100 of 3 degrees Celsius or higher. The engineers have made clear that decarbonization by 2050 is feasible, by shifting power generation from coal, oil and gas to zero-carbon energy sources, wind, solar, geothermal, hydro, ocean, biomass, nuclear or fossil fuel with carbon capture and storage, and by using that zero-carbon power to provide the energy for downstream uses, notably transport, buildings and industry. To the extent possible, downstream uses should be directly electrified, as with light-duty battery electric vehicles and electric heat pumps for home heating. And when direct electrification is not feasible, the zero-carbon power should be used to create synthetic, or green, fuels such as hydrogen, green methane, green ammonia and other fuel carriers that can be combusted without releasing CO2 into the atmosphere. The amazing finding by economists and engineers is that most or all of the decarbonization is within reach at very low cost, perhaps 1% or less of annual world output until 2050. Yet here geopolitics enters the scene. Indeed, geopolitics may prove to be the single biggest factor in the success or failure of the world's quest for decarbonization and energy safety. The limiting factor in decarbonization, it seems, is not low-cost alternatives, nor the shortage of zero-carbon primary energy sources. Solar radiation and wind alone could power the planet. The limiting factor, it seems, is global political cooperation to get the job done through a variety of policy instruments such as carbon pricing, public investments, public-private R&D and government regulation. And what is the real source of this political resistance? One answer is the usual problem of free riding, as each nation tries to get the others do the hard work and bear the incremental costs. But something else is at play: geopolitics. For 2 centuries, national control over fossil fuels has been the key to the global realm. National security, military strength and political power have been deeply intertwined with the nation's control over fossil fuels, especially in the case of countries that are rich in fossil fuel reserves. And when global superpowers have lacked sufficient domestic supplies of key energy resources, such as the British Empire and oil during 1900 to 1950, and the US in oil after 1945, at least until recently. They have deployed their military might to secure effective control over overseas oil, often through wars or coups to install pliant regimes, especially in the hydrocarbon-rich Middle East. The energy transition to zero-carbon energy is, for these reasons, being heavily shaped, and more specifically, slowed, by today's fossil fuel-rich countries, especially the US, Russia and Saudi Arabia, but also Canada, Australia, Venezuela, Brazil, Mexico, Iran, Iraq and others. If the world succeeds in decarbonizing, these fossil fuel-rich countries stand to lose, at least relatively, in three ways. First, they will suffer major capital losses as their fossil fuel reserves are stranded, that is, left under the ground by the requirements of climate safety. Second, they will suffer ancillary economic losses as their treasuries can no longer finance the public sector through fossil fuel rents. Third, and perhaps as consequential as the first two, they will lose geopolitical relative advantages as their concentrated holdings of fossil fuels are supplanted by globally diffuse access to wind, solar, hydro and other zero-carbon energy sources. The two populous giants of the planet, China and India, are perhaps the most complex players in the unfolding geopolitics of the energy transition. On the one hand, both of these giants are densely populated and highly vulnerable to climate change, India especially. China is water scarce, especially in the north, and further global warming could play havoc with China's ecosystems. India is heavily tropical, water scarce and already under intense ecological stress and degradation. Parts of India are now reaching 50 degrees Celsius summer days in the context of global warming. Large swaths of India could be rendered essentially uninhabitable through the combination of poverty, water stress, global warming, air and water pollution, soil degradation and other forms of environmental degradation. Nor are these two countries fossil fuel rich. They each have enough coal to do dire and lasting damage to the global environment, but they are also both heavily dependent on imported hydrocarbons. The EU is another key region in this geopolitical puzzle. As one of the three hubs of the global economy, together with North America and Northeast Asia, Europe's energy transition is a vital part of the global story. Europe is mostly fossil fuel poor, especially after 2 centuries of fossil fuel extraction and use. As such, the European politics are strongly directed towards decarbonization, except in the few remaining pockets of local coal production, Germany, Eastern Europe and Spain. The energy transition geopolitics to date, therefore, shapes up as follows. The major fossil fuel powers are generally resistant to decarbonization, now led by the Trump administration, which has become an outright foe determined to topple the Paris Climate Agreement. While Russia, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Brazil and others still offer rhetorical support for decarbonization, in practice they tend to line up behind Trump in closed-door negotiations. The European Union is on the other end of the geopolitical spectrum, with much to lose from global warming, as is basically true everywhere, and with little at stake in terms of European fossil fuel reserves. China and India are the world's swing actors, giants that can shape the planet's climate prospects this century, and with mixed motives. On the one hand, they face potential disasters with runaway climate change and are in any event heavily dependent on hydrocarbon imports. On the other hand, they still have significant domestic deposits of coal, which provide vast employment and which constitute a powerful industrial lobby for the status quo. Of course, as this volume spells out in considerable and illuminating detail, the geopolitical issues extend beyond fossil fuel haves and have-nots. The zero-carbon energy technologies will also give rise to new global value chains, for example, for the key minerals used in solar panels, wind turbines and batteries. Copper, lead, molybdenum, nickel, zinc, cobalt, lithium and rare earth minerals are all key inputs into the new zero-carbon technologies. These mineral resources are also unequally distributed around the world. Many are located in unstable and impoverished societies, such as the Democratic Republic of the Congo and cobalt reserves. Already the world's major regions are anticipating an intense rivalry and geopolitical competition over global supply lines for the key minerals. As with the past century's many wars over oil, this century could see wars over the mineral inputs to the new energy economy. The geopolitics of the energy transition will, therefore, involve an intense and highly disruptive era of international relations, one that could end up sinking the world's hopes for climate safety under a multi-meter sea level rise. if global delay and disruption prevail over global cooperation. To succeed globally, we will need to chart an era of unprecedented cooperation. Here too, this volume is of inestimable value and insight. Global success will require new forms of industrial policy, global diplomacy, transnational infrastructure, global-scale public-private partnerships for research and development, and shared policies to adjust to ongoing climate change as well as to decarbonize the energy system. In sum, we are in for a tumultuous era in geopolitics that will require our greatest reservoirs of wisdom, tolerance, diplomacy, and global-scale cooperation. To reach such an unprecedented degree of cooperation, we will need an unprecedented degree of global understanding. This unique volume offers a vital and timely contribution to that much-needed new era of global understanding. Jeffrey Sachs, Columbia University, New York, USA.